Girl Confessional podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Lowries, and the Good Girl Confessional podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40 Women Beyond 40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond who want to think about kick-ass ideas amongst a community of other like-minded women. You can check us out at WB40.com. Before we begin today's podcast, I would like to acknowledge the traditional elders of the lands on which this podcast is recorded, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I would like to pay my deep respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So today in the podcast, I am really excited to welcome back, she's now calling herself a friend of the Good Girl Confessional, she sure is, Kerri Sackville, the extraordinary author and columnist. She is back on the podcast today because I'm so excited to talk to her about this amazing new book. She's written a book called The Secret Life of You, How a Bit of Alone Time Can Change Your Life, Relationships, and Maybe the World. Now, if you're thinking spending time alone seems almost like an indulgent or almost like an impossibility, this is definitely the podcast episode for you. She is so insightful. Kerri's wisdom is incredible. I'm so grateful for her time today. I know you were going to love every single bit of this podcast. Please rush out and buy this book. It is so worth the read. It's incredible. Welcome to the podcast, Kerri Sackville.
Hey, it's another Sandy here, Sandy Davies. I'm the founder and formulator of Happy Pause Balm for intimate dryness. Find us over at happypause.com.au. That's happypause.com.au. And get some happy on down there. And in the meantime, keep listening to Powerhouse Sandy Lowries on the Good Girl Confessional podcast, where every woman has a story.
Hi, Kerri. How are you? Welcome to the Good Girl Confessional again.
I'm like, you can now call me a friend of the pod,
Yes.
a friend of the Good Girl Confessional.
You are a friend of ours. We love you. We love everything you do. So excellent. How are you?
I'm good. Very happy to be here.
I'm super excited to have you here because today we'll be talking about ta-da. For those who are watching along, you are going to see this beautiful, amazing book, which is Kerri's new beautiful book called The Secret Life of You, which I love.
And the cover is so nice. I'm just so happy with what they did for the cover. It's so beautiful. Yeah, you never know what it's going to look like, and you know, they send you the cover and they say, "Oh, we're really excited. What do you think?" And you're kind of waiting, and sometimes it's like, and this one is so lovely. So I'm very pleased.
Really, truly a beautiful book. What are these fish? Are these koi?
They're koi. Wow. Well done. I had to be told they were koi, but well done. They are.
Beautiful, because it's got, I love this. So if you can't see this, but we'll put it all over socials because it's stunning. The book's kind of got these beautiful blue Japanesey looking koi fish on it. And then there's this one beautiful orange koi fish down here.
Swimming alone but surrounded. Yeah.
I love that. Oh, wow. Have you been busy? Far out. Since we last talked, a whole new book. That's incredible.
Yeah. It was a busy time. There were 2 books in 2 years, and that was not really how it was meant to be. I'd actually started working on this book and thinking about this book. And this was really my passion project. And then I had the opportunity to write the book that I released last year, about a year ago, The Life-Changing Magic of a Little Bit of Mess, which was great fun, and I so enjoyed writing that. But this is actually what I have been thinking about and wanting to do for quite a while, and I feel so strongly about it. I mean, it's all about the importance of spending time alone with your thoughts, and I feel that for so many people in, you know, the culture that we live in, which is a culture of busyness and constant connection, and of course, you know, with social media and the addictive nature of apps, you know, so many of us have lost the art of actually being able to sit by ourselves and turn inwards instead of outwards. So that's what this is all about.
Wow, and it's absolutely incredible. I'm just going to say that. So Tracy Spicer has a little blurb on this book on the front cover, which I love, because she says, and I'm going to quote her, everybody who wants to have a life well lived should read this book, a masterpiece. Tracy Spicer. We love you,
That I,
Tracy
that was,
Spicer.
yes, I nearly fell over when she sent that through. That was wonderful. I
But
mean,
it's really true. It is, and as you say, such a lost art. And I call it an art because now, as and you so rightly say about spending time alone can sometimes feel like an indulgence
yeah,
in this kind of world that we have created for ourselves. I worry about like this younger generation because, you know, we're chicks of this certain brilliant age. But I wonder about there's a whole generation of people out there. You've got kids, I've got kids who will, I wonder, will they ever understand or know what it is like to spend time truly alone with their own
that's
thoughts?
that's so true and so important. It's something I think and worry about a lot. And it's interesting because I've noticed the difference between the way my two older kids, who are now 22 and 24, how they use social media compared to my 15-year-old. Because my big kids had time without it, whereas my 15-year-old has grown up with it, and had access to devices really young, which is a real regret of mine. But I don't think I knew enough about it then, and as I wrote in the book, I mean, when you and I were young, if we were in our bedrooms, we were alone with our thoughts because none of us had landlines in our bedrooms. I mean, there was, generally one landline, usually in the kitchen, and it certainly wouldn't extend to the bedroom. We didn't have TVs in our bedrooms. I think when I was probably an early teenager, I got a clock radio, which was really exciting. So I could listen to music. But if I was alone in my bedroom, I was either reading or writing in my journal or just thinking. If I was walking to school, I was alone with my thoughts. If I was sitting on a bus, if I was waiting in a queue. So, we had lots of incidental moments of solitude. That was part of life. It was just woven into our experience. And what's happened is because of mobile devices, and because of social media, in every idle moment, we can now pick up a device. So if we're standing in a queue, if we're alone in our bedroom, if we're out walking, we can listen to a podcast or make a phone call. And so because we can do that, we do it. And then what happens is it's becoming harder and harder to then just be alone and switch off our devices. We're losing the capacity to do that. And so when you said earlier that alone time is an indulgence, yes, for some people it feels like an indulgence. For other people, it feels like an impossibility. And I talked to a lot of people when I was writing the book about how they viewed alone time. And some people would say to me, oh my God, I need it. I can't live without it. One woman said to me, I need alone time because there are knots in my brain that need untangling, which was just so poetic and beautiful. But other people were like, absolutely not. No way. I don't want to look inside. I don't want to think my thoughts. So there's this real kind of dichotomy between people who need it and people who are terrified of it. And I think with kids now, and like with my 15-year-old, I don't even think she knows what it means. I try to talk to her about it, but why would she want to be alone with her thoughts when she can just pick up her phone and be alone with other people's thoughts? And we need that time. We need it because, well, for so many reasons, which is what I go into in the book, for our emotional well-being, for our relationships, for creativity, for moral courage. There are huge consequences with the way the world is going now, with us losing that capacity.
Yeah, wow. It's really interesting. I was talking to a brilliant young woman recently who said to me that she works in the comm space, so this is quite unusual. She watched a whole few like documentaries about, what these phones and what social media is really doing to our brains. I, by the way, did tell her about your beautiful book and said she's going to love this one because she's decided she's taking this massive break from
Yeah.
social media. And I asked her, how is it going? She's 2 weeks in and she said, so far I'm okay, but I still find I'm reaching for that phone, looking
Yeah.
for apps, looking at the, right? It's so habitual.
Yeah.
But she said, like, it's hard. You kind of struggle initially to go, well, what am I supposed to do with all this time?
Yeah.
And do you find that that's part of the issue as well? When people get to that point where they go, well, I've got all this time on my hands now. Some people, I think, are really terrified to be alone with their thoughts.
Yeah. A lot of people are. And do not know how to, as I said, turn inwards. The way that I referred to it in the book is, we all have a secret life. We all have a world inside our heads. There was a philosopher, Michel de Montaigne, who referred to it as the back shop of our mind. So we all have a back shop that we can retreat to, but it's something that I don't think we have to learn to do. We do it naturally as kids. You find that kids are very good with their own minds. I mean, you give a kid a toy, a very young child, and you see the child kind of chatter to the toy. but they're not talking to the toy, they're talking to themselves. They're playing the role of the toy, they're playing the role of themselves. But then, as soon as we give them devices, as soon as we distract them, as soon as we talk to them, they're brought out of that. And, eventually the more that that happens, and the more that we do that to ourselves later as adults, the less we lose that capacity. We forget how to go into the back shop of our minds, and we don't know what to do when we're there. So I have a whole lot of suggestions and very practical techniques to help us become accustomed to that. But people do, they get stuck and they think, what do I do now? And there's a lot you can do. I mean, you can literally ask yourself what you think about your life and about the world. You can talk to yourself as you would talk to a friend. You can think for pleasure, which is something that I write about. So many of us are used to thinking catastrophic thoughts or thinking about everything that can go wrong. And we forget that we can actually think for pleasure. We can fantasize. We can, use our memories. We can, have conversations with people we wish we could have conversations with. We can reflect on our lives. We can take time for contemplation. And these are all really important activities. But if we don't give ourselves that opportunity, then we're missing out on so much. Another way I look at it is, I imagine that, say you're taking a car trip, right? And this car trip is going to last 20 years and it's just you and this other person in the car, and you've got someone sitting next to you and they're an interesting person with thoughts and attitudes and opinions. And imagine for that 20 years you sit there in the car and you do not talk to that person. It would be ridiculous, right? Everybody would talk to the person next to them. But we're that person. We are the ones who are walking beside ourselves for our entire lives. And to not ever spend time with ourselves, to not get to know our own inner worlds, to not get to know who we are and what we think, is such a waste. Aside from all the other consequences, it's such a waste. And, of course, people come and go from our lives. Our friends come, they go, our kids grow up and leave home. Sometimes we have partners, sometimes we don't. Partners can leave, partners can die. And even in the best relationships, there are times when our partners can't give us what we need, or we feel disconnected. We have to learn to be friends to ourselves. We have to learn to support and nurture ourselves if we want a full and happy life. They're just some of the reasons. There's a lot. There's a lot.
Well, I think why it resonated for me so much, and you've just hit on one of the points I was going to say actually, is that, I was in a marriage for a long time, 18 years, and then that person left, and then it was quite sudden, all those things. And I remember thinking, I've never been alone in my entire life, right? Because, you're at home, and then I got married the first time to some childhood sweetheart. Anyway, bless him. But anyway, that didn't last very long. But kind of straight into another relationship. I get married to this human. We have children together. We're together all this time. I realized that I surrounded myself and filled up every minute, every moment of my life with others, or with things, right?
Yes.
Because I hadn't really learnt how to create that for myself. And there's a big danger in that. And I know that you you definitely talk about this in the book, but there's a danger in when you cannot fill the void yourself, is that you look for constant external validation so you don't feel alone, so you don't feel lonely. And I know that you're going to talk about this because it's so great. So you don't feel lonely, or so that you don't have to be alone with your thoughts. And as you say, so you don't have to turn inwards and do the damn work.
Yeah. And that's such an important part of it. And in fact, when I was writing this book and I was saying to people, I'm writing a book about alone time, and a lot of people would hear that as loneliness. And they'd say, how's the book on loneliness going? And it's not. It's in fact the opposite of loneliness. And the more comfortable we are in our own company, the less lonely we're going to be. And the less comfortable we are in our own company, as you said, the more then we need to turn to other people to fill ourselves up. The more that we need to turn to other people to give ourselves validation, support, nurturing, the more precarious our emotional well-being is going to be, because we can't give it to ourselves. We're dependent on all of these other people giving us what we need. And, a lot of people get that as well from social media. And so they're very dependent on the likes and the comments. And it's, again, very precarious position to be in. People, there's nobody in the world exactly like you. There's nobody in the world exactly like any of us. We are all unique individuals. And we will meet people through our lives who we connect with, who we get along with, who we love, who we want to spend time with. but nobody will ever always give us what we need. And there will inevitably be moments of feeling lonely, feeling disconnected. And in those moments, we need to be able to turn to ourselves. And if we can't do that, then in those moments of disconnection, we are going to feel completely bereft. And I've spoken to so many people who are just constantly out all the time, needing to socialize, needing to be on social media to fill themselves up because they can't do it for themselves. And it means that every time somebody either can't be there for them on the other end of the phone, or they don't get likes on their post, or they don't have anyone to go out with, or whoever they're dating or seeing at the time, is distant, they fall apart. And so, if we want to be okay in ourselves, we have to learn to just sit with ourselves and learn how to connect with ourselves. And that is the basis of connecting with other people. And the flip side of that is when we really know ourselves, then we can be known by other people. And that sounds really wishy-washy and spiritual. It's not at all. When you think about love and what love means, it means, like, everybody says the same thing about love. I want to be loved for who I am. I want to be seen for who I am. I want to be able to be myself, right? That's what we all aspire to.
Absolutely.
But if we don't know who that person is, how do we recognize it when it's there? We can't feel seen unless we can see ourselves. We can't feel known unless we have a reasonable idea of who we are. And yes, we can love people without loving ourselves. I don't believe that. Loving yourself is a very hard thing to achieve. But if we don't feel comfortable with ourselves, we're never going to feel comfortable with other people. And if we don't know ourselves, we're never going to recognize when we are known by another person. And that ends my TED talk. I feel so strongly about all of this, and I just want people to hear and to start to think about it, because so many people, I think, are just kind of racing along, constantly distracted, constantly looking outwards. And I just want people to take pause and start centering on their own, a little bit on themselves and their own inner worlds.
Absolutely, because it is such an important topic. And I think in this day and age, right here, right now, where we are, I think that your book is needed more now than ever. And in terms of, like, I know you've just made a joke about TED Talk, but I could really see you doing an extraordinary TED Talk on this because this topic is so important, right?
Yeah.
And as I touched on before, like, learning to be by yourself is a difficult journey, but a really important one. So now what happens in my life, once you get there, it's kind of like, every now and then I'm like craving it. I'm like, oh, gee, wouldn't I like to have time completely on my own, a couple of days all by myself? How amazing would that be? And I know, like, I think you touched on this as well, but years ago, people would have taken themselves off and gone, I'm going on to a cabin by myself, all right, which is brilliant. And, I remember, like, my parents, my mum going, okay, well, I'm out of here. And she'd take off for a couple of days and we'd go, oh, why are you going?
Yeah.
Because I need to.
Yeah.
And right? I think we've lost the art of that as well because people don't sit with themselves. They can't imagine taking that time. Like, people are always astounded when you're in a room with, say women especially, and someone says, oh, I went on a holiday all by myself. Who did you go with? No, by myself, all by myself. And people go, what?
Yeah, we really stigmatize it, and it is something really new. Back in previous generations, previous centuries, artists, poets, musicians would literally take themselves off to a cabin in the woods. They would have a patron who paid them to do it. I mean, wouldn't that be nice?
How amazing!
And they were revered and admired. Nowadays, somebody says, right, I'm going off to a cabin in the woods for a couple of weeks, and everyone's like, are you okay? Are they having a breakdown? And it's because we really stigmatize in our culture. We stigmatize a couple of things. We stigmatize singledom, for one. So we prioritize relationships. So we have this idea that relationships are like the locus of all happiness. And in fact, relationships do give us lots of meaning and fulfillment in life, but they're certainly not the only source of meaning and fulfillment. There's other things. There's hobbies. There's work. There's helping other people. There's passions, there's our own inner worlds, right? So, we give an unfair, I think, weight to relationships, and then we don't prioritize time by ourselves, and to the point where we're a bit suspicious of it. So, as I wrote in the book, there's all these weird rules around solitude. So it's perfectly fine to go and have a cup of coffee and read the paper by yourself. But if you go out and have dinner by yourself in a restaurant, people are looking at you like, oh, that's a bit sad, right? It's fine to go off backpacking around Europe for, a few weeks by yourself. But again, if you go off just to be by yourself in a house somewhere, people think, something's wrong. So, and human beings obviously are not meant to be alone all the time, but we're not meant to be never alone either. And so we've gone too far in the other direction. And we're not meant to have constant stimulation. So on a daily basis or even a lifetime, we're meant to take some time out just to decompress, to get rid of all the content that's out there. And by content, I don't just mean social media. I mean other people's opinions, other people's ideas, the way other people see us. When we're around other people, we have to kind of show up and have like a personality and be giving all the time and be, even when I'm talking to you now, I'm aware of, are you listening? Are you interested? Are you bored? Are you dropping off? Are you laughing? Like we're constantly, when we're with other people, playing to that other person. Even when we're with our most intimate partners, our families, we have to be constantly aware of who they are, what they need. We need time just to let go of all of that and just to be ourselves. And there's that great quote, we are who we are when nobody's watching. And it's true. And we need that time just to be able to shed, our public persona and the work that it takes to be engaging with other people and just breathe and be ourselves and prioritize ourselves. And just from a really practical point of view, if you have to be around other people all the time, then you are almost like needing permission from them to do the things you want to do. So say you've always wanted to visit Italy, or you're desperate to see this film, or you want to eat, a burger tonight, no one else does. If you need to be with other people all the time, then you're waiting for somebody to say, oh, Sandy, I'll come and have a burger with you, or I'll go to the movie with you, or I'll come to Italy. You can actually do it by yourself.
Hey there. When Sandy's not interviewing kick-ass women, she's hanging out with me at Alex the Seal, a podcast about music and nostalgia. I'm Jo Pybus, and each episode, Sandy and I talk about all the songs that got us hooked up, knocked up, and broken up. Do yourself a favour and search Alex the Seal on your podcast app. Love you, Molly.
Like you don't need permission from anybody else.
So true. And, I learnt this over the years from other people. This is the interesting thing. I had friends, along the way who've said, oh, I always go and see a film by myself. And I go, oh, really? Well, if you ever want, company. And they go, no, really? Yeah. I really like going to see the film by myself. They don't want to stop and wait and say, one friend in particular really likes quirky foreign films and whatever, and good for her. And so she's like, I don't ask people to come, and nor do I care. I'm just going by myself because I want to see it and I love it. I've got another friend, I'll shout out to Kathy because she's brilliant like this. She travels by herself, but she also will go and see bands by herself. She's mad for music. She loves ska bands and, punk bands and whatever, and off she'll go by herself. Chick in her 50s,
which is fantastic.
I love that. Yeah. I think it's amazing, and you're right, because it's stopping this whole bullshit dynamic of we have to ask permission to live our lives in whatever way we want to live.
Oh, look, the number of times I hear someone say, oh, I really wanted to do this, but, John wouldn't go with me, so I didn't. It's like, go by yourself.
Go by yourself.
If we want to live fully, we have to actually, first of all, have the capacity to ask ourselves what we want. Because, again, when you're constantly with other people and doing what they want to do or catering to the demands of your friends or your partner or your kids, whatever, you don't necessarily even ask yourself what you want. So we have to first have the space to look within and ask ourselves what we want, how we want to live, what movies we like, what we want to eat, and then have the strength to be able to do it. Because otherwise we get to the end of our lives and we've spent our whole lives doing what everybody else wants us to do or being limited to what other people want to do. And there's a whole, a list of things that we have never done. For no reason other than we're scared to do it alone. And, when you're sitting watching a movie or you're eating a meal, the other person they might be next to you, but they're not eating the food with you. They're not helping you chew. They're not actually seeing the movie behind your eyes. It's literally just having someone there, I think, more than anything, to ward off the awkwardness of being alone. It's actually harder when you're, there's been research. It's the memories that you make when you're by yourself are stronger because you're not distracted at all. So when I'm sitting in a movie, if I'm sitting next to you, again, I'm constantly aware of you next to me. Is Sandy enjoying the film? Is she laughing? Oh God, she's getting a bit restless. Oh, does she want the popcorn? When it's just me, I can just focus purely on the film. And it's the same way when you're traveling or when you're eating something. So we have to get over that weird shame about being by ourselves, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with having solo experiences. It's really healthy and it's really important.
And I find it really interesting. I love this. I find it, and Kerri, you wouldn't have to share the popcorn, which is the most important part.
Exactly. Well, for me, it's a choc top usually, and I am not sharing that with anyone ever.
Can't share a choc top.
No.
People travel all the time. Like I know my partner travels all the time for work, always. So he's at the airport by himself. He gets on planes by himself. He's a big boy, does whatever he wants by himself, right? Okay, great. Why do you think this weird thing about go flying solo and I don't mean just physically on a plane, I mean going to things by yourself, has become a thing? If you're doing it for business, it's okay, but if you're doing it for yourself, it's taboo.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that whole social stigma where our culture is incredibly focused on relationships. And anybody who's been single for a period of time, as you and I both have, when I was single for 8.5 years, and I say this a lot, like when I was single, I lost track of the number of times I was asked why I was single. Like some people would actually say, "What's wrong with you? Like why can't you find a partner?" Now, in the 17 years I was married, I was never once asked, "Why are you married?" I've now been in a relationship for 18 months. You think anyone has said to me, why are you in a relationship? Like it's just this assumption that not being in a relationship is something really sad and lamentable, and you're really just like waiting, to get into a relationship. Whereas, in fact, being single is a perfectly valid way to live your life. And there are lots of people who never want to be in relationships. And similarly, I think that our culture really frowns on any kind of solo activities, because we assume, because of our focus on relationships as the locus of all happiness, that it is better to do an activity with somebody else. And therefore, if you're doing it by yourself, it's because you couldn't find someone else to do it with. And again, that's kind of lamentable and sad. And again, plenty of people want to do things by themselves. I mean, I have taken myself off to, my parents have a house on the Central Coast, and I've taken myself off there deliberately by myself. I've gone places by myself. I often go and we'll sit in a coffee shop and have lunch or a coffee or whatever by myself. I've traveled by myself, gone to shows by myself. And there's nothing missing about it at all. It's a really, I'm taking myself on a date, like I'm a worthy person to spend time with. So it's just this stigma, and I think we all have to break it down by not buying into it. And the more people who are out there, living fully, either as single people or just engaging in solitary activities, the less that stigma is going to stick around, because we'll start to normalize it, and it should be normalized. And also, as people are living longer, eventually, even if you're in a partnership, someone unfortunately is going to die first. There are going to be a lot of people, even if they've been partnered their whole life, who are going to end their lives as a single person. We all have to get used to spending time alone.
100% agree with this. And I had a conversation the other day with a lady in her 80s who said to me, no one calls me enough. And, nobody rings me. Like, it's always like, and then I feel so lonely. And now lonely, I don't want to, disregard lonely, but I did say to her, the fascinating thing about being lonely is that loneliness is part of life. At times, we're all going to feel incredibly lonely. And I know that you explore this, and I love this, because we both have been single women. And then you find out the difference between, loneliness is a part of life.
Loneliness is absolutely a part of life. And there's this whole narrative at the moment. And in fact, I just wrote about it for an article in the papers. Like, we've got this whole narrative at the moment about loneliness as being an epidemic, and it's a very new phenomenon. And some people almost refer to loneliness as a disease. And loneliness isn't a disease, and it's certainly not new. Like, people have been lonely forever. I mean, you just imagine generations ago. I mean, before love marriages were a thing, people expected to be lonely, particularly in their marriages. They didn't expect to love their partners. They expected to move away from their families and marry some person for convenience or for necessity. And if you think about, a servant back in the 19th century or the 18th century, living with, in someone's house, scrubbing the floor, they were lonely. Of course they were lonely. Everybody was lonely. But what loneliness, the whole, I guess, panic about loneliness now is that our expectations of relationships now are way different to what they used to be. So we expect now not just to love our partners, we expect them to be our soulmates, our best friends, the parents of our children, financial providers. We expect them to be everything and fulfill all our needs. We expect to have, a really close-knit group of friends who are always there for us and always supportive. We expect to have, a chosen family around us. And they're great expectations, but they're not always realistic. And the higher our expectations are of the other people in our lives. See, loneliness is the gap between the connection that we feel at any given time and the connection that we actually have. And so the higher our expectations are, the greater that gap is going to be, and the lonelier we're going to feel when people inevitably can't meet all of our needs, because no one can meet all of our needs. And yet the more that we can look after ourselves and connect with ourselves and support and nurture ourselves, the more then we're free to accept the other people in our lives for who they are, not expect them to be everything, not expect them to fill us up all the time because we're filling ourselves up. And then we're free to enjoy them and love them, and we feel much less lonely. So it's a really symbiotic relationship between our connection with ourselves and our connection with other people. But loneliness, to kind of, too long didn't read, loneliness is not new. It's always been there. And we also have to take responsibility for loneliness by connecting with ourselves before or as well as trying to connect with other people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, this whole, and I suppose too, the rise of this talk about loneliness kind of came about during COVID, this whole, like, it's a new phenomenon. You're right. It's not a new phenomenon.
No.
I mean, I can remember, the reality is most people have felt loneliness because they're alone, but they've also felt loneliness when they're surrounded by people. You can be in a room full of people that you really like, and you can still feel the loneliest you've ever felt in your entire life, right?
Oh, yeah. And you can feel far, far lonelier lying next to another person in bed, if it's the wrong person, than you can by yourself. And I can tell you now, I was far lonelier in the last years of my marriage than I ever was as a single person. Because feeling disconnected from someone who is so physically close to you is an incredibly alienating experience. And, when I was on the dating scene and I would go on dates with people and I would sit opposite them and have nothing in common with them, feel miles apart, couldn't find a point of connection. And I would come home feeling much worse than when I started. And I felt much less lonely just being at home by myself. So, there's a lot of, I think, misconceptions about loneliness, and we're very panicked about it. And of course, there's the whole extra layer of social media, because people, when they feel lonely, turn to social media as, I guess, a cure for loneliness, when of course social media is connectivity, but it's not real connection. Right? So people then spend hours and hours on social media trying to seek that connection, but they're not getting it. So they come away feeling lonelier than before, and so go back onto social media. And, if social media was a cure for loneliness, none of us would have felt lonely in COVID, because we're all on our phones all the time. So social media is actually making it the problems worse, and not for the least because it stops us connecting with ourselves as well as providing sort of kind of faux connections with other people.
Look, it's such a valid, brilliant, and important point, because I agree. I think that's this kind of, pandemic, they're calling it loneliness pandemic. And you go, listen, loneliness is not a pandemic, but you're right. The problem is that, and especially with younger people too, but it does happen at our age group. I witness it, amongst people who, as you say, because they can't sit for 5 minutes by themselves. There's people but for young people, it's like the constant need to feel accepted, validated. Please be my friend. How many people liked my post on Instagram, or how many friends do I have on Facebook, or whatever the hell it is, right? As you say, that's not true connectivity. It's not true connection.
It's really not. And something that I wrote in the book that I mean very deeply. I've had a couple of posts. I mean, I've got a social media following. I've never been massive on social media, but I've had a couple of times in my life where I've written something. I think when I was on Twitter, I wrote something that, went a little bit viral, got like 10,000 likes, something like that. It's happened a couple of times. And I could tell you that felt all very nice for a second, but it didn't make me feel connected. It didn't make me feel more connected to myself or to other people. I feel far more connected and far more nourished by sitting down having a 20-minute cup of coffee with a friend than I do from getting 10,000 likes on Twitter or Facebook or wherever it is. It doesn't provide genuine connection. What it does is provides an illusion of connection with a lot of people, but none of them are real connections. They're all very low friction connections, meaning that they're very low stakes. And the most meaningful way to connect with another person is face to face. The second most meaningful way is by something like this, by being on Zoom or being, on FaceTime and actually seeing each other's faces as you talk. The next level is the telephone. Things like text messaging comes way, way down the track, way down the list, because text messaging is curated. There's no spontaneity. There's no looking at each other. There's no responding to each other's facial cues or nuances. It's very easy to misunderstand it. And then things like comments and likes are so far down that they barely count at all. I mean, that's not connection. It's some kind of communication, but it's not two people actually being vulnerable and sharing and meeting each other. It's literally just words on a screen. And the more that you use social media and the more that you turn to that for your feelings of connection, the more lonely you're going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is that you're right. It's that sense of not being able to look someone in the eye, as you said, and you've talked about this on this podcast. So true. Body language is such a big deal, like when you're looking at someone and you're connecting with them and you kind of get it, like you smile, so it makes me smile, or whatever, like just then, right? So there you
go.
And
so
oh, great. It's so important, but the lack of that across social media, and there is a lack of that, definitely, as you say. Texting someone is very, and things like, I'll send my son a text and he'll write K.
Yeah. Look, at social media, I mean, texting is really good for short bits of information, like, can you pick up milk on the way home? Yes. Or what time will you be home? Or are we still on for tonight? That's all fine. But to be having any sort of proper dialogue, it's absolutely useless. And in fact, people are so different on text and via social media. So I'm sure you're exactly the same. The number of times I've met somebody who I've, been connected to on social media for years, and they turn out to be so different to their social media persona. And again, when I was dating, and I'd have these, I learned not to do it, but it took a while. I would have these long text exchanges with a man and think, oh, we're really getting along and this is really promising. We really connect. We have so much in common. And then I'd sit opposite him at a table and be like, he's nothing like his text persona. And probably he thought the same about me, because when we're texting each other, for all I know, I send him a text and then he's thinking about it. Maybe he's getting his mates to write it. He's showing it to his daughter and she's going, oh, Dad, you need to change that. It's not actual spontaneous, vulnerable communication. So it's got a purpose, but when we're using it to replace actual communication, then it's really problematic. And, I can see with my kids, it's just so infuriating. Yours are probably the same. Like, say we'll be going somewhere and my daughter's meeting a friend and I'll say, look, what time are we meeting her? And she'll say, I'll find out. And she's texting. I'm like, can you just not call? No. I don't use the phone for that. Like, she won't pick up. And this is what's happening. We've got a whole now generation of people. I don't know why they're called phones anymore, because they don't use them as phones. They can't actually speak to each other.
And they fear speaking to each other on the phone. It's a really weird dynamic. You watch it. I'm the same. I'll pick up the phone and I'll actually call. I have a lot of friends who go, oh, just text me because I won't pick up. I'm like, really? Because it's kind of a bit of a cop-out. But then those same people are likely to say, oh, I feel really lonely, no one calls me.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And it becomes almost a phobia. And it's very easy to happen. I remember when I was in lockdown and I got so used to not seeing people because none of us were seeing anyone. And then when we were allowed to go for walks, like in pairs, whatever it was, and a friend said to me, we should go for a walk. And I'd got so, used to isolation and not seeing people that I remember the first time I said no. And in the end, she came and knocked on my door and said, we're going for a walk. And that kind of broke the spell. But it's very easy to get into these loneliness loops where it feeds on itself, where, you start to fear social interaction and you start to feel insecure about it and misinterpret it. So it's really important that we maintain our skills. And, this isn't just, it's very easy to say, oh, this is just a woman in her 50s saying, oh, kids these days don't use their phones. But these are really important skills to have, to be able to talk to other people, not just to communicate with them via text, because you can't have intimate relationships via text. Like if they want to eventually have close, nurturing relationships, which everybody needs, they need to be able to have those social skills. And so when they do catch up, when groups of friends catch up, I spoke to a couple of people who said it was really heartbreaking that their young kids went on a play date and the other child was just on their phone the whole time.
Yeah.
And so they're losing those chances to interact. That's why I also think it's so important not to have phones at dinner tables, and because those are the moments where we can connect deeply. Because again, the deeper our connections with other people, then the more they sustain us when we are alone, and so the less lonely we feel. As I said, it's really symbiotic, and so we need to nurture those moments of connection.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think one of the things that we try really hard, like, my kids are grown-ups and, whatever, and I only have one living at home and the other two are out. But anyway, when they all come around for dinner or we go to their house or whatever, like it is that kind of thing now that it's just a given that you don't put your phone. Your phone's not at the table, right? That's our moment of actually connecting as a family.
Yeah.
And there's so many beautiful moments of gold. And you would see this with your kids as well when you all come together. That's when you go, oh, so how's work? And then they start talking about their work. And then their siblings jump in.
Yeah.
And I love watching the magic between them that happens. And,
completely.
And their partners with the siblings and all the things. And you just kind of go, it's such a beautiful thing. Whereas once they leave the table, even if you're in the same house and still having drinks or whatever, oh, who wants wine or whatever, someone will always be looking at their phone. Like, I guarantee it.
Yeah.
It's a really kind of bizarre thing that and we've indulged it, I think.
I don't think we knew. We didn't know. I think it all crept up on us so quickly.
No idea.
We didn't know. We didn't understand. This is all unprecedented, like we say it so often, but it really is. And but that means we know now. And, the tech giants know.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think it's quite well known that the tech giants do not give their kids technology because they know how dangerous it is. They gave it to us to give to our kids, but they don't use it. And so, especially with the young ones, it's a really hard battle. Like I used to have amazing moments in the car with my big kids. I'd pick them up from school or I'd pick them up from their activities, and it would be in the car that we'd have those spontaneous conversations. You might sit silently for 10 minutes and then a kid would say, oh, Mum, I'm upset about this, or this great thing happened. And now when I pick up my 15-year-old, most of the time she's on her phone. And so I'm losing those moments. So I'm trying to talk about, banning phones in the car as well. But it crept up on me and I didn't realize, and I'm trying to work with it now. But we all need to be aware of what's going on. And, for new mothers, and they probably won't be listening to this podcast, but maybe new grandparents, the best thing we can do for our kids is to hold off giving them devices for as long as possible. And when I see parents pushing their toddlers in prams and the toddlers are looking at a mobile phone or an iPad, and I understand it because it's really hard being a parent and you just want to shut them up for 10 minutes to have some space. But little kids are really good at learning to be or being with their thoughts. And we're taking that away from them by giving them devices. And we're actually robbing them of the opportunity to learn to daydream, to learn to be creative and use their boredom to turn it into creativity. So the longer we can hold off giving kids devices, the better.
Yeah, look, I so agree with that. And I know it is tough. So there's no, like, we're not sitting here shaming new parents or whatever. Absolutely not. It's bloody tough. But, on the lead up to this podcast, and because reading your book and whatnot, yesterday, of all times, I was on a train yesterday and watching a young dad and his little girl was in the pram, and she would have been maybe 2, I think. And she was grizzly and tired, and it's the end of the day, and no doubt, he's picked her up from childcare or whatever. And he pulled out his phone and he put on, I don't know what the show was because I'm so out of the loop now, Kerri, some cute kiddie show, I don't know.
Probably not the Teletubbies anymore, but
not
who knows?
Teletubbies, but it was cute. Whatever it was animated. And just the difference in this child, it was like a trance-like state. And I realized then, then I'm looking around and it's all the grown-ups on the train. And everyone's in this, not one single person was making eye contact with anyone because everybody had they're face down in that phone. And the only person who ended up making eye contact with me as because, I'm people watching,
Yeah.
we're going, wow, this is amazing, looking at all these people on their phones, was that young dad. And only because he'd handed his phone to his kid.
Wow.
And he had
Yeah.
nothing else to do. So when I'm looking around, he probably thought, oh, I'm a little bit startled. There's somebody looking at me. It's quite amazing. That's what it's like on public transport now too. No one's looking out the window or reading.
No one's looking out the window. We all used to look out the window, and we all used to look at each other and talk to each other. And so that's the other consequence of the world that we live in, is that we're also losing those incidental moments of connection, because we used to sit and make eye contact with other people and have a chat. And even, you approach a cash register, and so many people, as they approach the cash register, are on their phone. So we're not even having those moments of connection with sales assistants. And again, the more we can have those moments of connection, those little tiny moments, they feed us and they nurture us and they help us when we're alone, because we feel connected and we feel nourished. So it's this really vicious cycle that we're all responsible for breaking, I think. And, certainly I'm not preaching to people that they need to throw their phones in the river or go off and spend, a month at a silent retreat or in a cabin in the woods. I'm just hoping that people start to notice every time they pick up their phone, or every time they deny themselves a chance to just sit on the couch and do nothing, because I've got to be busy, I've got to be doing something. I just want people to start taking advantage of the tiny little moments of solitude that are available to them. So, for example, if you're in the car, maybe, and again, I love podcasts, this is a podcast, but maybe don't listen to a podcast every time you're in the car. Maybe when you're going for a walk around the block or down to the shops, don't take your phone with you. Maybe when you're sitting waiting for your child to come out of school, just sit with your thoughts. Or when you're sitting in a waiting room. I was in a waiting room yesterday and everybody was on their phone and I'm just sitting there kind of staring into space and thinking. And it was really positive. I enjoy doing that, and I try and make eye contact with people and they go down to their phones. So just take advantage of those small moments that kind of present themselves. And then that kind of helps you to learn then that you're comfortable and safe by yourself. And then you can start thinking about maybe taking yourself out to dinner or taking yourself out to a movie or going for a weekend away. But start with the tiny moments.
I love that advice. And I think that that's kind of something that I'm trying to aspire to, that, I'm a podcaster. So of course I listen to a lot of podcasts, but when I go for walks in the morning, quite often it's an instant thing is to put a podcast in.
Yeah.
Right. Or listen to an audiobook or whatever, rather than just being alone with my own thoughts. Yeah. And I think that I'm going to, I am trying to aspire to those moments of going, right, just, what? Just cut down.
Or when you're making dinner, or when when you're doing the laundry. We all have little moments where we can just be. And it's just a question of, we should not be consuming content all the time. It's too much for our little brains. We need that time to decompress. We need that time to think our thoughts and get in touch with ourselves. So just carve out tiny little moments that present themselves and then move to the bigger things.
Yep. And my big thing now is, and I have been doing this and I'm starting to get quite successful at it. As I said yesterday on a train, when I get on a train, I don't automatically just look at my phone. I just keep the phone in my handbag and just watch other people. And I used to be such like a big people watcher. And I do love doing that when I'm in a cafe or whatever. I love watching people because people are fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? They
are.
Yeah.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And I love that, you've called the book, The Secret Life of You. And I love that because I do think that when you're people watching, you actually see it. And I often, maybe it's the writer in me, I'm sure you do this too, but I always think, oh, what is that person thinking about? Oh, I wonder what their life is like.
Always.
Right?
And when I see people together, I'm constantly like, oh, so what's their relationship? Are they brother and sister? Are they partners? How did they meet? Are they happy? How long have they been together? Oh, fascinating.
All the
fascinating.
time. I would sit there and think, oh, are they on a first date? I
watch
body language. I think, this is so fun. You see someone in the other day I saw this an older woman, probably, I don't know, 70s, in this fabulous bloody outfit. And I thought, oh, what is your backstory?
Yeah.
She was too far away or I would have asked, right? I would have said, oh, I love your outfit. Wow, you're amazing. And quite often you're right, because those moments of connection are so important. It probably would have made her day too. Although watching her walk down the street in this fabulous outfit, I thought she doesn't really give a rat's ass pass what anyone thinks, or you know what I mean? Like, it was so beautiful. But I did think, oh, where did you come from? What sort of life have you had? Oh, I wonder what you did for a living or do for a living. Like, it's very
Yeah.
exciting. You touched on the television show Alone in your book, and I wanted to ask you about this because this is, this whole thing about loneliness and whatever, has sparked things like this television show Alone, where they basically just drop you in the middle of nowhere and go, see how you fend for yourself. I love that you wrote about it, but tell me your thoughts about it.
Oh God, I love Alone. I love Alone. And I've watched several seasons. We have the Australian Alone at the moment. But I've watched, Alone Alaska. There's various Alones from the United States. I think there was one Alone, Sweden, I think it was. And the thing that's really fascinating about Alone, so they drop survivalists into the wilderness by themselves. So they'll drop 10 in different locations. They're allowed to take like 10 items. And they have to survive as long as possible, and the last one standing wins. And something really fascinating happens. So when they drop, the first things that they have to do is they have to get fire and they have to get shelter. Like, they're the two priorities, and water, of course. And then the next thing is to find food. And so they hunt and they fish, and some have more success than others. Some of them can't do any of that, and so they kind of drop out quite quickly. They can't get the fire going, or they can't find food and they're starving, or their shelter falls down. But then a small group of them always, every season, no matter which one you watch, will be able to get all their needs met. So they'll be able to get enough food, they'll be able to get enough water, they'll be able to make their shelter, get fire. And then something really weird happens. That's when the psychological stuff starts to kick in, and that's when the loneliness starts to take effect. And so you'll see these people who are incredibly strong, who are so capable, who can survive in the wilderness, start to fall apart. And it's at that point when they don't have any purpose anymore, right, when they're not fighting just to stay alive, when all their needs are met, they start to think, what am I doing here? I miss my family. I don't understand what the point of this is, and they tap out. So the thing that I learned from Alone is that in order to be by yourself, you need to have purpose, you need to have structure, you need to know what you're doing. So it really, really helps. I mean, in life, not just in solitude, but it helps to have a purpose. So for people who are really struggling with solitude, it helps to be able to have, a set purpose or a set structure, something to keep you going. So say you're going to spend, a couple of hours by yourself, think, right, I'm going to paint my painting because I love painting. I'm going to clear out this room, or I'm going to take the dog for a walk. Like, so just to have a purpose really helps sustain us in moments that are quite unstructured. It's a fascinating show. It really is.
It is.
And one of the seasons, someone actually stayed out in the wilderness. I think it was 100 days. And by the end, he was like having conversations with his dead mother and delving into memories. And the ones that do make it, the techniques that they use are really interesting. Like, some of them start composing music and singing songs, and some of them, get very spiritual and are praying, and others are chatting to dead relatives or making things for their children back home. It's a huge, and you watch Alone and you think, if they can do that, I can spend 15 minutes without my phone.
Right? And
it's not that hard.
It's not that hard. And you give all these really great, like, this is the other thing about this book that I want everyone to know about, is that, you're not just writing from your perspective. You are writing from your perspective, of course you are, but you are also giving people very tangible examples and tips on how they can start to spend this time. And when they don't have to start out big, as you said. No one's saying go away for 3 weeks, sit with your own
God,
thoughts.
no.
Oh, can you imagine? That's a difficult thing if you've never spent any time alone with your own thoughts. But you are giving really practical hints and tips. And as you say, even just to, I'm going to take this on board, as you just said, like when you go for a walk, just don't turn the phone on.
Yeah.
Don't take it with you.
And there are very specific tips. Like, one of them, for example, is to be in nature. If you're struggling to be by yourself, we humans, I was very surprised to learn this. I did a lot of research for the book. We are genetically programmed to find nature soothing. We can't help it. So if we're going out and looking at a tree or listening to the sound of the ocean or feeling sand under our feet, our whole nervous system calms down. So if you're struggling, go outside and just sit under a tree for 5 minutes, or go for a walk, in your local park. It really helps. It is a natural calmative. So that's one. Thinking for pleasure is another one, which I really like. And there are lots of tips in there, and lots of interesting facts about about solitude and about alone time.
It
So
is
yeah, there's a
fascinating.
lot in there.
I think during COVID, we were talking about that COVID before, and everyone was like, "Oh, I'm so lonely and I miss so many people." I was living in the house with my partner and my daughter, who I love them both to death. I really do, but I was craving time by myself as
Yeah,
well. So that's the
yeah.
other thing. And so I started to do things like, and everybody got on the bandwagon. We all did it. Well, maybe not all of us, because it's counterintuitive to your last book, let's face it, of trying to organize cupboards and
Yeah.
pantries and things. But I really got into it. And I realized that the reason I got into that of, ordering, bloody containers and crap off Amazon or Kmart or wherever, and really getting into it, was because that was my alone time, right?
Yes.
My
Yes.
downtime. And while I was doing that and sorting out my bloody different pastas, like, honestly, who cares? But while I was doing that, what was
It's
happening
great.
was I was doing it because I was doing it by myself. No one was
Yeah.
helping me. No one wanted to help me. Believe me, my partner could have thought there was nothing more boring and ridiculous than sorting out the pantry. But for me, that was my alone time. And then I
Yeah.
started to go through the wardrobe, and then I started to go through other rooms. Believe me, that's all gone to hell in a hay basket, and I'm fine with that. But at the time, I think there's lots of things you can do to find your own solitude, to do things. And you raised before, and I think this is such an important one. So many people I meet have not got any hobbies outside of their families, their relationships, whatever. They do nothing that's just about them.
Yeah.
And I've always been a person who's had my own thing going on, had my own hobbies, had my own whatever. I think as creative people, maybe it's easier to find that. But I do think it's so important for every single person to have something outside of the family, whatever that may be.
Oh
Whatever it
God,
may be.
100%. And something that I wrote was, I think it's really important to sit down and take some time, not in one session, but as an ongoing project, and have a real think about how you would like your life to look in an ideal world, what you would really love to be doing if anything was possible, because that gives you a window into what is actually possible and practical. So you might think, God, in an ideal world, I'd like to be a famous actor. Now that's probably not going to happen if you're now in your 50s or 60s or whatever, but it means you can take an acting class, or you can read about famous actors, or you can watch
Yes.
movies about behind the scenes, or you can go to the theatre more, right? A lot of people think, oh, I'd love to paint, and you might never have painted before, but you can literally pick up a canvas and throw some paint around, or you can do a painting class, or again you can go and wander around an art gallery. So you go as far as you can in your mind what you would do if there were absolutely no limits, if you had all the money in the world, all the time in the world, and then from that you take what's possible. And it is really important to have something for yourself, and everybody has something they enjoy. It might be something, a little out of the box, and that's great. I mean, my kids all have different things. I like to write and I like to read, and I knitted for a while, and I'll probably come back to that. And, I have other hobbies and I like to go for long walks, things like that. My big girl is an artist, and she'll just spend hours and hours and hours drawing. My little one likes to make candles. No one in the family makes candles. I didn't even know that was a thing, really. And, there's candle stuff all over my kitchen, but that's what she likes to do. And I'm thrilled because it's something for her. It's her and her imagination. And it's just so important that we all, explore those different sides of ourselves before it's too late. Like, life is short. You've got to live it as fully as possible.
I agree, and this is the other thing. Because I did not long ago have this really big conversation with a friend who was feeling like, really like, I guess her, when your partner retires, and she thought they'd spend all this time together, but he's off doing other things, and she's like, oh, go find things to do for yourself was my big thing. Like, it's really important, and maybe you don't know what that is yet, and that's okay. And maybe you're going to try 500 things, and none
Yeah.
will stick. But guess what? Maybe one will, and maybe
Yeah.
you'll be really passionate about it, and you'll love it. And it's okay too. I think that the other big point, and I've talked about this on this podcast with other people as well, and I'm sure you'll agree, it's okay to change your mind. So if you've been
Gotcha.
playing bloody, I mean, I don't play golf, but if you've been playing, I always use golf as an analogy. I don't know why I don't play it. If you've been playing golf for like 30 years and then you suddenly decide, actually, I don't want to do that and I want to be a painter, then go bloody do it. I don't, just change. Who cares?
Well, this is why checking in with yourself is so important as well, because so many of us do a lot of self-reflection and analysis when we're like in our 20s, right? That's when you start to work out who you are and you think about your life, and then we don't check in with ourselves again. you know, or maybe not until there's some big life change like a divorce or a bereavement. But we're constantly changing. And even if we're not, the world is changing around us. So we need to be constantly checking in with ourselves and saying, right, is what I'm doing still working for me? Is what I've thought I was interested in still what I'm interested in? I mean, my tastes have changed enormously over the years. You know, even when I think about what I used to read, you know, I was very big. I studied 19th century literature and, you know, and I used to like really just, I'd be rereading Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte and Dostoevsky. And now I just want contemporary fiction and I read a lot of nonfiction. My tastes have changed. My taste in shows have changed. My taste in men has changed, you know, my taste in friends has changed. Like we're constantly changing and evolving. And if we never take the time to check in, we're going to be doing now what we did 20, 30 years ago, and it may not be working for us. So we have to get to know who we are at any given moment because we are all different people to who we were, God, yesterday, last week, let alone, you know, a decade or 2 decades ago.
Oh, so bloody true. And I tell you what, taking up things when, regardless of your age, like I get a lot of questions about, oh, why did you start a podcast at your age? And how did you start a podcast at your age? And I don't even understand bloody tech, so how did you do it? Those are the sort of questions I get all the time. But I always say, you don't have to take that. You don't have to start a podcast. You don't have to write a book. You don't have to.
No, of course not.
But here's what you can do. You can start to write down a list of things that, what are things I'd always thought I wanted to do when I was a kid, because, you know, I know it's, you know, psychology 101, but it's really important. I think it does really bring you back to yourself. Like when I was a little kid, I always wanted to be a writer. And when I was a little kid, you know, I always thought I was going to be an actor, a radio announcer or whatever. I thought I was going to like be hosting like Countdown.
This is Countdown-esque.
Kind of. Oh, you know, and now I'm co-hosting a second podcast, which is about nostalgic music of the 70s and 80s. So see, kids dream big. You never know, right?
Yeah.
But it is just that thing of like really thinking about, as you say, what floats your boat, what excites you, what has that little bit of spark going on. And that 100%, as you just said, our tastes change and it's okay to change. I think about, you know, the beautiful Kate Murphy, who never thought she was going to be a painter, and now she's an extraordinary painter.
I've got one of her paintings hanging up on my wall. I love it. She's amazing.
I've got painting envy. I've got painter envy now. I've got yes, I'd like one.
I'm very lucky.
I'm gonna, you know, get one. She's amazing, but I'm just saying she's a perfect example of going, well, you know what, you know, people can listen to Kate's story about how she started, but the interesting part about all of that was saying, oh, I didn't even know I could paint, never picked up a paintbrush, right? She's very creative in other ways. Now she's like seriously selling all these extraordinary paintings and bringing so much joy into the world. But more importantly, as she said, if she'd never sold a single painting, it didn't matter. It didn't matter.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
And I know other people who've done other things, like started making cakes, you know, in midlife, or you know, my aunt who's obsessed with bridge now, you know, is playing bridge all the time. There's all sorts of things. And again, it doesn't even have to be like your great passion. Just try different things. Just get in touch with yourself instead of, you know, being led by other people, whether that's, you know, in content on social media or just by what your family or friends like to do. You know, you are worthy. You are worthy of attention. You are worthy of time, and you're worthy of your own personal needs and desires and interests being acknowledged and honoured.
Yep, and I love that. And I know, you know, years ago when I was a blogger and I was talking about, you know, dating back in the day, sex dating and relationships, you know, one of the things I remember writing like a post about this, about could I date myself? And the answer back then was probably a resounding no. And now, like, I look at where I am now and I go, could I date myself? Yeah, actually I can. And it's okay to do it. And it's okay to, as you say, to take yourself out for a coffee, take yourself out for dinner, take yourself, if no one wants to see that movie, too bad, go by yourself, go to the theatre, be like my friend Kathy and go see a band. Who cares?
Yeah. I talk to myself all the time. And when I say talk to myself, I mean, I genuinely talk to myself. I will chat to myself in the car and I will ask myself questions that I would ask other people. So, how are you feeling? What did you think about that? You know, what are you hoping for? You know, I'll ask myself my opinion about things. And it's really interesting because then I'll answer. So I tend to ask the questions out loud and then I'll answer in my own head, or vice versa. Like one voice I speak out loud, one voice I don't. But when I ask myself questions, I'm often surprised by the answers. And I'm very good at asking other people questions. I'll say to my friends, how are you feeling? What happened last week? What do how are the kids? Are you happy with your relationship? And I don't ask myself. And so when you do start to ask yourself, you'll be really amazed by what you say. We don't spend enough time talking to ourselves and asking ourselves how we feel and what we want and what we need. And the flip side of that is that when I am unhappy or tired or in pain or whatever, I can also comfort myself. So I can say, Kez, you'll be okay. Like, everything's all right. You'll get through this. I've got used to speaking to myself as if I was a friend, and I speak to myself the way that I would speak to a friend. So when you say, could you date yourself? Well, I think I literally have befriended myself. But that was a process, and it was learning to just turn to myself before I turn to other people. Now, we all need support. We all need nurturing from other people. But I think it's really important to start with ourselves. And so, for example, just on a small scale. So say I try an outfit and I'm not sure what I think about it. I'll ask myself first, before I send a photo to a friend or before I call in one of my daughters and ask them. Or say I read a book, instead of immediately jumping into looking what the reviewers say, I'll ask myself first, what did I think of that? And then I'll listen to other people's opinions. So we need to always still turn to other people, but always start with yourself.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that in doing that as well, this is probably we could go on and on and on here for hours, I know. But in doing that too, one of the things that I think happens when you start to refer to yourself first before others is that you then start to listen to your own instinct as well. And I think that that is also a dying art of listening to our gut, of listening to our instinct, because we're so consumed in media, with media, social media, whatever it may be, television shows, we're streaming, we're doing whatever, that we're we're watching reality television shows, right? Which is not real life people.
No.
It's not. These people are put in they're real people, but they're put in extraordinary circumstances
to
react in a certain way. And whether it's alone or whether it's bloody Real Housewives of wherever. I do think that when you refer to yourself a lot, I've been doing this for a number of years now, is that I have started to really, really become more in tune with my own gut instinct as well, and kind of trust myself more.
So important. And I wish I had done that a long time ago, and I wouldn't have had such an interesting book in the dating book that I wrote. But, a lot of the situations I got into, the bad situations, were because I did not listen to my gut. Now, we all have a voice. We all have gut instincts, but particularly as women, we're taught to kind of override our gut instincts and to always defer to the other person. And something I wrote in this book a lot about is moral courage, and how people who subscribe to conspiracy theories or to far right propaganda, often they're not subscribing to a cohesive system of thought, right? You ask them about it and they can't even really explain what it means, because there is no logical system of thought, but it's a failure to think. So what happens is that they read something, they hear something, and they just kind of go along with it, because they don't actually stop and take a step back and contemplate and sit with themselves and work out whether this all actually makes sense, whether this is moral. And it's the same with gut instinct. So when we never stop and contemplate, when we never think about what we're doing or think about how we're reacting, then we can override our gut instincts. We can override our moral center. We can defer to other people. We can defer to the loudest voice in the room or the loudest voice on the internet. So it is so important to be able to step back, just to make sure that we are constantly in touch with ourselves, with our morality, and with our instincts. The more that we outsource our opinions and our beliefs to other people, again, the more precarious our moral compass is going to be.
Absolutely. And you were so right on the money, hit the nail on the head at the beginning of this podcast when you said that companies know this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right? All those people sitting behind those algorithms absolutely know this, and they are feeding you that information to make you stop thinking for yourself. Because when you stop thinking for yourself, you become a mindless consumer of things, whether it's politics or goods or whatever. This is a reality as well. So your book is so powerful. As I said, it is incredible. I know that you know, your other books I have absolutely loved, and you write with quite a bit of humor, etc. But for me, this book is honestly the penultimate. I love, you know, congratulations. Because
Thank you. I really did. Yeah, I really did put my heart and soul and many, many, many hours of research into this, and I'm proud of it. And I hope that you know, I hope that it just makes people think and maybe tweak their lives, even in small ways, because I just want everybody to, you know, not just for their own lives. I meant what I wrote on the cover. You know, a little bit of alone time can change your life, your relationships, but maybe even the world. I think the world would be a much better place if we all could spend a little bit more time alone with our thoughts.
Oh, I agree. And you know what? You might just end up liking what you find. So
Exactly.
which is really cool. I am so grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on. I know that this has been an absolute passion project. And labor of love. And I know, you know, for those that don't know, writing a book is a huge endeavor. And you did 2 in 2 years. I don't know how you did it.
I don't know either. I'm very tired.
Well, tired, but
happy.
thankfully learning, like, that you've learnt these amazing skills, right, too, actually, like, you know, it's not just about self-love, it is about just spending time alone and with your thoughts. And if you hadn't have been, I guess if you hadn't have done that, this magic may never have happened, right? So I think that it's extraordinary. So thank you so much. You're brilliant.
Such a pleasure being here. And you're brilliant too.
Oh,
and 2 podcasts.
And I am going to put your book and all of your details where everyone can grab it in across all of, you know, in the show notes here, but across all of our social media as well, even though we said don't get on social media. But,
a little bit.
So when you're on my social media and you see this, please then rush out, buy this incredible book and spend time alone reading it. And because there is some genuine magic in this book. I know that you've really made me think long and hard about how I spend my time, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
I'm so glad. Thank you, Sandy.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is brought to you by WB40, Women Beyond 40 magazine, available now at WB40.com. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to quality podcasts. We're also now available on YouTube. We chat with really interesting women about their hard-won wisdom, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for your support. Bye for now.